This isn't a coaching search, at least not the kind you think it is. What's happening inside the Cleveland Browns building right now has nothing to do with chasing the hottest resume, winning a press conference, or calming fans with a familiar name. This is something far quieter, far more deliberate, and honestly, far more dangerous for the rest of the league if it works. Because for the first time in a long time, Cleveland isn't reacting to chaos, they're planning around it, and that single shift changes everything. On the surface, the Browns are doing what every team does this time of year. Interviews, meetings, long conversations behind closed doors. But when you look closer, the pattern doesn't feel random. The names being brought in aren't flashy. They aren't meant to dominate headlines or trend on social media. Instead, they share something much more specific, a way of thinking, a way of teaching, a way of developing quarterbacks that suggests this search isn't about who's available right now, but about who fits a vision that already exists. That vision revolves around alignment, not just between coaches, but between the front office, the locker room, and the future of the most important position in football. The Browns aren't just asking, can this coach win games? They're asking something much more uncomfortable. Can this coach think the same way we do? Because the fastest way franchises fall apart isn't talent, it's disconnect, and Cleveland knows that better than anyone. They've lived through eras where the coach wanted one thing, the GM wanted another, and the quarterback was stuck in the middle trying to survive. What makes this moment different is that the Browns appear to be building backward on purpose. Instead of drafting a quarterback and scrambling to protect him, they're building the environment first. Instead of hoping the right pieces fall into place, they're engineering the conditions that allow a quarterback to succeed before his name is ever called. That alone should stop people in their tracks. Teams don't usually do this, especially teams with Cleveland's history, but that's exactly why this stands out. There's also something else hanging over this process that no one is officially saying out loud. Every interview, every retained coach, every philosophical choice seems to orbit around a very specific type of quarterback. Not a backyard magician, not a raw athlete who needs chaos to thrive, but a cerebral passer, a processor, someone who wins with timing, structure, and preparation. And while nothing has been announced, there's been quiet buzz, reports, and plenty of league speculation suggesting this entire operation may be designed with Shedeur Sanders in mind, not as a guarantee, not as a lock, but as a blueprint. And that's what makes this so unsettling for people who've watched the Browns for years. This doesn't feel impulsive, it doesn't feel emotional, it doesn't feel like Cleveland chasing hope because they're desperate. It feels calculated, almost cold, as if the organization finally decided to stop swinging wildly and instead build a system that demands intelligence from everyone involved, coaches, players, and executives included. That's not the Browns we're used to seeing. If this really is what it looks like, then this isn't just a moment, it's a pivot point. A franchise that spent decades being defined by reaction, suddenly thinking 3 steps ahead. A team that used to draft quarterbacks and pray, now designing an ecosystem before the quarterback even walks through the door. And if that ecosystem is being built for one specific name, one specific skill set, and one specific future, then what's unfolding in Cleveland right now isn't subtle at all. It's a declaration. The only question is whether it ends in clarity or collapse. The quiet giveaway wasn't a leaked quote or a dramatic report. It was the combination of names showing up in the same room. When the Cleveland Browns interview list started circulating, the reaction was confusion. No splash hire, no obvious headline grabber, just a group of coaches who, on their own, didn't scream urgency. But when you line them up side by side, the signal becomes impossible to miss. This wasn't randomness, this was filtration. Every candidate shared a specific trait, even if their backgrounds looked different on paper. Quarterback development, system flexibility, teaching over ego. None of these interviews were about star power, they were about fit. And that's the part most people glossed over. Teams chasing relevance usually cast a wide net. Cleveland did the opposite. They narrowed their focus so tightly that every interview felt like it was run through the same philosophical lens. If you didn't match it, you weren't getting the call. That lens starts at the top. This search doesn't feel like it's being run by a committee fighting for control. It feels unified, and that points directly to Andrew Berry. Berry isn't just checking boxes or appeasing ownership. He's testing alignment. He's asking whether these coaches see quarterback development the same way he does, whether they value teaching habits over quick fixes, whether they can operate inside a system without needing it to revolve around them. That tells you this isn't about winning the offseason, it's about avoiding internal fracture 2 years from now. Here's where Cleveland's past makes this so revealing. For decades, the Browns hired in fragments. One voice drafted the quarterback, another voice hired the coach, another voice dictated the scheme. And when it fell apart, everyone blamed the player. This time, the process looks inverted. The coaches being interviewed already fit together conceptually. They speak the same football language. They prioritize preparation, structure, and adaptability over improvisation. That doesn't happen by accident. That's the front office protecting itself from chaos. What really gives it away is who isn't on the list. No coaches known for rigid systems, no personalities that demand total control, no visionless stopgaps designed to buy time. That silence is louder than any rumor. Cleveland isn't interested in a reset button. They're interested in continuity before continuity even exists. They want a staff that can grow together without tearing the organization in half the moment adversity hits. And that leads to the unavoidable conclusion. This search isn't about identifying the best coach available today. It's about identifying the right environment tomorrow. Every interview functions less like an audition and more like a compatibility test. Can you teach the same way we think? Can you develop the same way we plan? Can you build without panic? Because whoever walks into this job won't just be handed a roster, they'll be handed a long-term blueprint, and only certain minds are trusted to execute it. Once you see that, the whole thing clicks. This isn't Cleveland being cautious, it's Cleveland being intentional. And that intention points to something bigger than a hire. It points to a quarterback-centered future that the Browns are quietly preparing for long before the rest of the league catches on. Dan Pitcher's name didn't jump off the page, and that was the first clue that he mattered. In a league obsessed with star coordinators and viral coaching soundbites, Pitcher represents the opposite: quiet, technical, process-driven. And that's exactly why the Cleveland Browns took him seriously. This wasn't about hiring someone who could dominate a press conference. It was about identifying someone who knows how to build a quarterback from the inside out. Pitcher's reputation isn't built on play-calling fireworks. It's built on calibration, timing, teaching young quarterbacks how to see the field at NFL speed without overwhelming them. That's why his time in Cincinnati matters so much. While he'll never take credit publicly, his fingerprints were on the early stages of Joe Burrow's transition into the league. Burrow didn't just arrive ready-made, he was developed. His processing sharpened, his command grew, and Pitcher was part of the environment that allowed that growth to happen. What makes this even more telling is that Pitcher isn't a stranger to the Browns' decision-makers. Andrew Berry already knows him. That relationship changes everything. This isn't a GM rolling the dice on an unknown voice. It's trust built over time. And in the NFL, trust often matters more than credentials. When a GM and a head coach think the game the same way, power struggles disappear. The message stays consistent, and quarterbacks don't get pulled in 6 different directions by competing philosophies. This is where the Pitcher angle becomes impossible to ignore. His presence on the interview list isn't about starting a rebuild from scratch, it's about replication. Cleveland isn't trying to invent something new, they're trying to recreate a proven developmental model, one centered around mental processing, system discipline, and gradual responsibility. That kind of approach doesn't work for every quarterback. It requires someone who wants to be coached, someone who thrives on structure, someone who plays the game with intention instead of improvisation. And that's where the speculation starts to get louder. While nothing has been confirmed, reports and league chatter suggest the Browns are laser-focused on a quarterback who fits that exact profile, a passer who wins with timing, accuracy, and preparation.
A quarterback like Shedeur Sanders. Pitcher's background aligns almost too neatly with what Sanders would need at the next level. A teacher, not a savior. A developer, not a dictator. Someone who can raise the floor before chasing the ceiling. There's also a deeper implication here that fans shouldn't miss. If Pitcher were brought in, it wouldn't signal patience in the usual sense. It would signal intention. Cleveland wouldn't be asking him to fix chaos. They'd be asking him to nurture intelligence, to take a quarterback with a high processing ceiling and build layers onto his game without stripping away confidence. That's a very different job than putting out fires, and it suggests the Browns believe they're finally in a position to stop panicking. The most revealing part isn't that Dan Pitcher was interviewed, it's why he fits. He represents a philosophical shift away from flash and toward function, away from chasing shortcuts and toward building habits. For a franchise known for breaking quarterbacks, that's a radical move. And if Cleveland follows through on that mindset, Pitcher's inclusion won't be remembered as a footnote. It'll be remembered as the moment the Browns showed they were done gambling and finally ready to build.
Todd Monken's name changes the tone of this entire search because his value isn't tied to perfection, it's tied to survival. When the Cleveland Browns looked at Monken, they weren't studying a coach who thrived only when everything went right. They were studying someone who proved he could keep an offense alive when it absolutely shouldn't have been. And in today's NFL, that ability matters more than any shiny playbook. Monken's recent reputation was forged in pressure. In Baltimore, his system wasn't built around comfort or stability. It had to bend. When Lamar Jackson went down, the offense didn't collapse the way so many do when a star quarterback disappears. It adjusted. The structure shifted, the approach simplified without becoming predictable. That's the adaptability test Cleveland cares about, not whether an offense looks beautiful on paper, but whether it can function when reality hits. Most coordinators are scheme first. They want the roster to match their vision. Monken proved he can work the other way around. He builds the offense around what exists, not what he wishes existed. That trait becomes invaluable when you're planning to introduce a young quarterback into a complex division like the AFC North. You don't want rigidity. You want someone who can scale an offense up or down without losing its identity. That's exactly what Monken has shown he can do. There's also an undercurrent to Monken's candidacy that goes beyond X's and O's. According to reports that have circulated since Baltimore's coaching shakeup, John Harbaugh's belief in Monken ran deep enough that it became a point of conflict. While details vary depending on the source, it's been said that Harbaugh's loyalty to Monken played a role in how events ultimately unfolded. That doesn't paint Monken as controversial, it paints him as respected, the kind of coach other coaches are willing to stand by, even when pressure mounts. This is where speculation starts to swirl, and it's important to frame it carefully. With Harbaugh no longer in Baltimore, league insiders have floated the idea that Monken landing in Cleveland could open the door to something bigger. Not a guarantee, not a done deal, but a possibility. Harbaugh has ties to the region. He has credibility Cleveland hasn't had in decades, and if the Browns were truly serious about signaling a new era, pairing Monken's offensive adaptability with Harbaugh's leadership would be seismic. Again, it's talk, but it's talk that exists for a reason. From Cleveland's perspective, Monken represents optionality. He isn't locked into one quarterback type, but his strengths line up cleanly with a high IQ passer, someone who can handle pre-snap responsibility, someone who benefits from layered reads and timing-based concepts. That alignment naturally pulls attention toward prospects like Shedeur Sanders, even if the Browns never say his name publicly. The fit is obvious enough that it doesn't need to be announced. What matters most is the message Monken's presence sends. Cleveland isn't afraid of complexity, they aren't afraid of adjustment, and they aren't pretending the path forward will be smooth. They want a coach who's already proven he can adapt under fire. Because if you're building a quarterback-first future, you can't afford a system that shatters the moment adversity hits. Monken's career suggests the opposite. When things break, he adapts. And for a franchise that's broken more often than not, that might be the most valuable trait of all. While most of the attention stays locked on offense, the real safety net in this entire plan sits on the other side of the ball. And the Cleveland Browns know it. That's why keeping Jim Schwartz in place might be the most important decision they've made so far. Not flashy, not dramatic, but foundational. Because if Cleveland truly is preparing to hand the keys to a young quarterback, the defense has to be more than just good, it has to be reliable. Last season showed exactly why. Schwartz turned Cleveland's defense into a problem for opposing offenses: physical, disciplined, ruthless on third downs. That wasn't built overnight, and it wasn't dependent on gimmicks. It was identity-based football. And identity matters when everything else is in flux. While coaches are interviewed and schemes are debated on offense, the defense provides continuity. It sets the floor. It keeps games from spiraling when the offense inevitably stumbles. This is where Cleveland's past mistakes come into focus. For years, rookie quarterbacks were dropped into chaos, leaky defenses, weekly shootouts, impossible expectations. Score 30 or lose. That environment doesn't develop quarterbacks, it breaks them. Pressure compounds, confidence erodes, and panic decisions follow. By retaining Schwartz, the Browns are quietly saying they refuse to repeat that cycle. They're choosing insulation over exposure. A strong defense does more than just stop points. It dictates the pace of development. It allows a young quarterback to learn in layers instead of all at once. Mistakes don't immediately turn into losses. Bad throws don't end seasons. The quarterback can manage games before being asked to dominate them. In a division as brutal as the AFC North, that breathing room is non-negotiable, and Schwartz's unit gives Cleveland exactly that. There's also a strategic element that goes unnoticed. Defensive stability prevents organizational whiplash. Coaches don't scramble mid-season. Front offices don't panic after 3 ugly losses. When the defense holds, patience becomes easier to sell. And patience is the currency you need if you're committed to a long-term quarterback plan. This isn't about hiding a quarterback. It's about protecting his growth from being derailed by circumstances he can't control. Keeping Schwartz isn't just about performance, it's about message. Cleveland is telling whoever becomes their next quarterback that they won't be asked to carry the franchise on day one, that there's structure behind them, that losses won't be blamed solely on their shoulders. For a young passer with a high mental processing ceiling, that kind of environment is invaluable. Confidence grows faster when survival is guaranteed. This is the part of the plan that feels the most mature. Flashy offenses grab attention, but defense sustains development. And for a franchise that's historically rushed quarterbacks into impossible situations, choosing stability over spectacle is a quiet admission of growth. The Browns aren't just building a staff, they're building protection. And that protection may be the difference between another ruined prospect and the first quarterback Cleveland actually gets right. Tommy Rees is the name that confused people the most, and that confusion is exactly why his interview matters. On the surface, his resume doesn't inspire confidence. His stint as interim offensive coordinator didn't light up scoreboards. The offense looked flat, the numbers were ugly, and for most fan bases, that would be enough to move on. But the Cleveland Browns weren't looking at surface results. They were looking at context.
Rees walked into an offense that was already unraveling. There was no clear identity. The quarterback situation was unstable. The system itself was fractured. Judging a coach on how he performed inside a collapsing structure misses the entire point of what Cleveland is evaluating right now. This interview wasn't about what Rees produced in chaos. It was about what he understands when there is structure. That's where his background becomes important. Rees comes from the University of Alabama coaching pipeline, built under Nick Saban. And that pipeline isn't about trick plays or offensive fireworks, it's about preparation, quarterback literacy, teaching players how to read defenses, control tempo, and operate inside pro-style systems. At Alabama, quarterbacks aren't asked to improvise their way out of problems. They're trained to eliminate problems before the snap. Cleveland understands that distinction. This isn't a team hunting for someone who can save an offense with clever design. They want someone who can help teach the position, build weekly habits, manage meeting rooms, establish expectations.
Rees's appeal has nothing to do with his recent stat lines and everything to do with his process. He knows how a quarterback room is supposed to function when development is the priority, not survival. There's also a misconception about what Cleveland expects from a quarterback in this potential new era. They aren't searching for instant dominance, they're searching for growth, for someone who improves month to month, not someone who forces wins with talent alone. A coach like Rees fits that timeline. He's methodical, detail-oriented, comfortable in environments where the early stages aren't pretty, but the long-term vision is clear. This is where the misread happens. Fans see Rees in assumed desperation. The Browns see Rees and see infrastructure. He represents the teaching backbone of a system, not the face of it. And if Cleveland does bring in a young quarterback with high processing demands, someone like Shedeur Sanders, having a coach who understands rhythm, discipline, and quarterback psychology becomes incredibly valuable. Rees's interview isn't about redemption, it's about recognition. Recognition that quarterback development doesn't start on Sundays. It starts in meeting rooms, walkthroughs, and film sessions, long before the lights come on. Cleveland interviewing Rees signals they're finally paying attention to that part of the process, the unglamorous part, the part that rarely trends, but the part that separates teams that cycle quarterbacks from teams that actually grow them. The easiest way to spot a rushed coaching search is the filler interview. The obligatory name, the courtesy conversation, the box check meant to satisfy process without influencing outcome. For years, the Cleveland Browns were guilty of exactly that. This time, there's no evidence of it, and that might be the loudest signal of all. Every interview in this cycle appears to serve a purpose. Even the names fans barely recognize weren't brought in for optics or league formality. They were brought in to be tested, evaluated, measured against a very specific standard. That standard isn't popularity, it isn't resume length, it's whether a coach fits what the Browns are trying to build at the quarterback position. If they didn't clear that bar, they didn't get a seat at the table. That's why the inclusion of lesser-known candidates matters so much. When someone like Aiden Dunn is interviewed, it's not because Cleveland is undecided or desperate, it's because they're being thorough, they're expanding the data set. They want to see how different minds approach the same problem, how they teach quarterbacks, how they structure offenses, how they communicate under pressure. Those conversations aren't about hiring, they're about confirmation. This is the opposite of panic, it's discipline. Cleveland isn't narrowing choices too early, but they also aren't widening the field unnecessarily. Every candidate is filtered through the same lens. Can you operate inside a quarterback-first model? Can you develop before you dominate? Can you align with a front office that already knows where it's going? That eliminates a lot of coaches immediately, especially the ones who need total control to function. What makes this so different from past Browns regimes is the absence of mixed messaging. There's no tug-of-war between old-school and modern thinkers, no conflicting signals about whether this team wants to win now or build for later. The interviews tell one story, the retained staff tells the same story. The speculation around quarterback targets fits cleanly into that narrative. Everything points in the same direction, and that kind of cohesion doesn't happen accidentally. This is why calling these interviews almost undersells what's happening. These are alignment audits. Cleveland is stress-testing philosophies, not personalities. They're making sure whoever they hire won't derail the larger plan the moment adversity shows up. Because when you commit to building around a young quarterback, instability is the real enemy. Not talent, not scheme, instability. And once again, that leads back to the bigger picture. This process only makes sense if Cleveland already has a clear vision for the quarterback they want to build around, a quarterback who needs structure, patience, teaching, protection. Someone like Shedeur Sanders, whose success would depend less on chaos and more on cohesion. Nothing about these interviews feels accidental. They feel like pieces being tested before the final move is made. There's no filler here because there's no confusion. The Browns aren't searching for direction, they're validating it. And that might be the most uncomfortable realization for a league that's used to Cleveland stumbling through these moments. At some point, denial stops being reasonable. When you line up the interviews, the retained staff, the philosophical tone of the search, and the type of coaches Cleveland keeps circling back to, it all starts pointing in one direction. Not toward a generic quarterback profile, toward a very specific one. And that's why so many people inside league circles keep coming back to the same name, Shedeur Sanders. Not as a guarantee, not as a leak, but as the cleanest explanation for why this entire process looks the way it does. Shedeur isn't the kind of quarterback you drop into chaos and ask to save everything. He's not a pure improviser. He's not built for backyard football and broken systems. His game is built on timing, anticipation, pre-snap processing, and command. He wins with his mind first, his arm second. That type of quarterback lives or dies by environment. Give him structure, teaching, and patience, and his ceiling rises fast. Drop him into dysfunction, and you risk stunting what makes him special. Cleveland's behavior suggests they understand that now.
Look at what they've prioritized. Quarterback developers instead of offensive celebrities. Adaptable schemers instead of rigid system lifers. Defensive stability instead of constant resets. None of that is accidental if your target is a cerebral quarterback. Those choices scream one thing. This franchise doesn't want to rely on talent to mask problems anymore. They want the problems removed before the quarterback ever has to face them. This is also why the timing matters. Cleveland isn't waiting for draft night to decide who they want. They're preparing for the possibility of Shedeur long before his name is called. That's a massive departure from their past. For years, the Browns drafted quarterbacks and then scrambled to make the environment fit. New coaches, new coordinators, new systems. Every year, something changed. What's happening now feels like a course correction. Build the container first, then drop the quarterback into it. There's also a personality fit that people overlook. Shedeur thrives in disciplined environments. He's detail-driven, demanding, comfortable being held accountable. That aligns perfectly with the types of coaches Cleveland is vetting. Teachers, communicators, process guys, not motivators chasing sound bites, not play callers chasing viral moments. Coaches who expect the quarterback to meet the system halfway intellectually. That alignment doesn't just help on Sundays, it stabilizes the building Monday through Saturday. Even the patience embedded in this approach points to Shedeur. Cleveland isn't acting like a team that expects instant dominance. They're acting like a team preparing for layered growth. Early management, gradual expansion, increased responsibility over time. That's exactly how you'd want to bring along a quarterback whose greatest strength is understanding the game, not rushing him, not forcing hero ball, letting him grow into control. None of this guarantees anything. Drafts are unpredictable, trades happen, boards change, but franchises don't accidentally design entire coaching searches around a type of quarterback. They don't accidentally prioritize alignment, development, and protection unless they know what kind of player they're planning for. And every sign coming out of Cleveland suggests they've already answered that question internally. That's why this feels different. It's not loud, it's not chaotic, it's almost unsettling in how calm and deliberate it is. If the Browns do land Shedeur Sanders, it won't feel like a gamble. It'll feel like the final step in a plan that started long before anyone outside the building was paying attention. This is the moment where everything Cleveland has built either holds together or falls apart. Because what the Cleveland Browns are attempting right now isn't half-measured or hedged, it's decisive. They've committed to a philosophy, and philosophies don't survive on intention alone. They survive on execution. Get one piece wrong, and the entire structure starts to wobble. What makes this so compelling is Cleveland finally seems to have clarity. Not hype, not desperation, not another cycle of short-term fixes disguised as long-term plans. This time, the organization looks aligned from top to bottom. Front office, coaching vision, defensive continuity, developmental patience. Every move suggests the Browns understand what they're building and why they're building it.
That's new, and for a franchise that has spent decades improvising its way through quarterback disasters, clarity alone feels revolutionary.
But clarity raises the stakes. When you plan this deliberately, failure hurts more. If the wrong coach is hired, if philosophies fracture under pressure, or if the quarterback plan collapses before it takes shape, there's no hiding behind bad luck or bad timing. This wouldn't be a stumble, it would be a breakdown. Because this isn't a swing taken in panic, it's a swing taken with eyes wide open. That's why this moment matters so much. The Browns aren't just deciding who calls plays or who runs meetings. They're deciding whether they're finally capable of thinking beyond one season at a time, whether they can resist the urge to blow everything up the first time adversity hits, whether they can protect a young quarterback instead of burdening him with the weight of the franchise. If they can do that, the narrative around Cleveland changes permanently. And that's what makes this plan so dangerous if it works. The AFC North isn't stable right now. Rivals are dealing with their own questions, injuries, and uncertainty. Cleveland isn't shouting for attention. They're positioning themselves quietly, building infrastructure, locking in identity, preparing for a future where competence replaces chaos. If that future includes someone like Shedeur Sanders, then the foundation has already been laid for him to succeed instead of survive. This is no longer about hope. It's about accountability. The Browns have drawn a line. Either they emerge from this with a sustainable model built on alignment and intelligence, or this becomes the most painful proof yet that even the smartest plans can collapse without discipline. There's no middle ground here. So this isn't the end of the story, it's the checkpoint, the moment where Cleveland finds out if they've actually learned from their past or just dressed it up in better language. Clarity or collapse, those are the options now. And whatever happens next, the Browns won't be able to pretend they didn't know exactly what they were trying to become.